Good evening, everybody. Bruchim Abayim, welcome everybody. I am on my way home from a little wedding out in the Poconos, and I wanted to talk about how last week the Prince Philip, the consort of the Queen of England, passed away. There was a very interesting bit of trivia about Prince Philip, is that he's venerated as somewhat of a deity on the islands in the South Pacific, the Yohannanen Islands, I believe. The Yohannanen people in certain villages in these islands had a legend that there was a certain very powerful mountain spirit, and the son of this spirit traveled to a distant land and was incarnated into a man who married a very powerful woman. And when they found out about Queen Elizabeth, who had visited the island, and they heard about how the colonial officers had respect for this woman, they assumed that her husband must be this deity that they venerate. And so it came to be that this group of native people pretty much worship Prince Philip as a god of sorts. And it's said that this belief probably began sometime in the 1950s or the 1960s, and that when the Queen and Prince Philip visited these islands, the people went to go see him from a distance, and he had no idea that he was actually worshipped as a god on this island. Eventually, that was in the 70s that they visited, and I believe in the 90s it was told him this legend and how he's worshipped as a god. And so at their request, he sent an official signed photograph of himself to the people on the island, and then and in return they sent him a traditional pig killing staff that the islanders use on that island, that the natives use. They sent that back to him, and then he sent them back at their request a picture of himself holding this staff. And and that's pretty much the story of this religious movement in the South Pacific around this man that they worshipped as a type of a god, and and he was not aware of it. Now that they got news that he's passed away, they have an elaborate mourning ritual that will last for about a year, which involves putting out yams and drinking kava drink and slaughtering pigs to eat as part of the traditions of this island culture upon the death of this deity, this spirit that they worship, that was manifested in this man. And the assumption is that once the year of mourning passes, they will then begin to venerate Prince Charles as this fetish, as this god in this part of their pantheon. Which, again, this is quite fascinating. Part of the story is that in addition to worshiping Prince Philip, a much more common type of what they would call the cargo cult religious movement is the John Frum movement. And some of the native peoples say that actually Prince Philip was the brother of John Frum. Now, who's John Frum? Apparently, they overheard some soldiers in World War II talking and saying something about John from America. And so they assumed that From was the last name. So they're looking forward to a sort of a Messiah figure who would come and bring all kinds of blessings and prosperity to the peoples on the islands and solve all their problems. And his name was John From. And there's actually a song I once heard about John from America, and it was a link to it on Wikipedia when I first did a little bit of amateur research on this subject of the cargo cults, and that's how I stumbled upon what they would call on the rabbit hole of Wikipedia, the Prince Philip movement. And the song that was like a folk singer made about John from America had a line there where they said the white man is making fun of us for waiting for John From, but you've been waiting for a man named Jesus for 2,000 years and he hasn't come yet, so why do you criticize us for waiting for John From? And then they're singing about all the things that will happen when John from America comes and blesses them and brings their eschatology into realization. The fascinating aspect of this is, in general, the development of religion, historically and archaeologically and anthropologically. And another aspect of this particularly is what's often called the cargo cult in general. There was a movie in the 1980s, I believe, called The Gods Must Be Crazy, where there was a Coke bottle had fallen from an airplane in the African jungle, and there was a whole religious fervor about this Coke bottle. And those type of approaches, again, they were more common really in the South Pacific than in Africa, and particularly, well, again, what we would call the cargo cults. But the similar aspects are things that you can find in throughout history and in archaeology, which leads people. So the cargo cult, major examples would be islands in the South Pacific that never were encountered by Western culture. And when in World War II the planes flew over them and landed there and so forth and left, the natives saw these airplanes as also some sort of a spirit or a god. And so in order to invite this back, this airplane god back, they built airplanes out of simple wood, not airplanes that could fly, but the shape of an airplane, as sort of, again, as in the terms of pagan culture, what they call a fetish or a totem. That I don't mean a sexual fetish. I mean a religious totem, and with the idea that they would invite this type of god back to their island by building this form. And the reason why that's fascinating to a lot of people is where a lot of people might know of the Ancient Aliens TV show on the History Channel, which Rabbi Bart Sadok, who I often mention, is part of the cast of the show. And often, particularly David Hatcher Childress and others, and Giorgio Tsukalo, I think his name is, the guy with the hair. They talk a lot about how these types of cargo cults manifested, it would seem, in ancient times, because you do find archaeologically things that look very much like airplanes, rocket ships, flying saucers, and things like that. So, pictures of men in spacesuits. Again, they could be interpreted in different ways, but the connection of how this exists in more or less, I'm not going to use the word primitive cultures, but pagan type cultures, traditional native indigenous cultures, this phenomenon that they call the cargo cult, and the similar movements like the Prince Philip movement and the John Frum movement. A lot of people believe that these archaeological manifestations that appear to be similar to technological expressions could very well be signs that these ancient native people were visited by some sort of a culture and civilization that had these types of technologies in the ancient times. Whether they were terrestrial or extraterrestrial, we don't know, but certainly they were alien to them, and they saw these beings as some sort of an object of veneration and even worship. And it's a fascinating bit of history and archaeology and speculation as to how these groups developed and where they come from, etc. So who knows if these things we know about the cargo cults, who knows if, again, these ancient artifacts that the archaeologists have discovered are not evidence that perhaps, like we said, that in ancient times these various cultures were visited. Again, they might not necessarily be extraterrestrial. They could be from inner Earth. They could be from Atlantis. But that seems just as fanciful to a lot of people as to say that they came from off-planet sources. So these things are fascinating, and we can see historically, where they have something in common in our modern day. I hope you apologize. I'm apologizing. I hope you forgive me for the way I'm talking. I'm in a bit of pain. I have a bout with gout that's lasted quite a long time. I'm going to have to make time to see a doctor. But we'll see how we can proceed. But it's particularly in my right foot, which I'm using to drive. It's quite painful. So I apologize for my mannerisms right now. But I thought that was an interesting story, and you can find on Wikipedia the Prince Philip movement, and they have, of course, more links there describing all of these things. I think it's quite a fascinating example of anthropology in action. in the contemporary time, in the 20th century, is similar to the I forgot what the African tribe was that has stories of extraterrestrials visiting from Sirius constellation, and that they were aware of planets or stars or things in the constellation that were not visible to them with the naked eye. And that's a fascinating bit of history there as well. So that's the story, and then there's other stories in the Congo of the people who claim to see in Mokele Mbembe, and what kind of animal that is. Is it some sort of a dinosaur or something? These types of anthropological examples and the speculations about them are quite fascinating. And again, we don't know what the real story is behind a lot of these things that are speculative, but we do know about the Prince Philip movement, cargo cults, a little bit about the John Frum movement, although it's still somewhat ambiguous, the history of that. So, but the ideas behind this, meaning it's more than mere animism, although I'm sure that these cultures are animistic, that they also have a sort of a pantheon that's above animism, which is the same as most pagan cultures, and even again some of our monotheistic cultures. A lot of the ideas of animism you can find in our in aspects of Jewish tradition. That every blade of grass has a mazel. Usually people say it's an angel, tells it to grow. It certainly has a sort of an animistic spin to that. And similarly, in Asian cultures, particularly in Japan and China, even in China, which is so atheistic, they have a sort of an animistic view, certainly in Japan as well, even of technology, meaning that there's a spirit that attaches itself to your cell phone, to your television, whatever it is, the car. And I grew up seeing that, how my mother would name her car and talk to her car, meaning obviously she's not talking to the car itself, the metal, but rather the mazel of the car, the angel of the car, the spirit of the car. And these types of ideas you can find even in rationalistic texts. For example, the Rambam, he says every planet and every star has an intelligence, has a seichel, which is an Aristotelian idea, but also somewhat of a mystical one. And I know Dr. Stephen Greer talks about communicating with the planets and essentially the seichel of the different planets, and also the spheres and so forth. So these types of things have makuros in Yiddishkeit. Just you have to know what you're talking about. So it's interesting. If you're interested in learning about these things, it's a lot what to talk about. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Of course, there's only one true God. He created this whole universe, and He created all the spirits and the angels and the demons and the ghosts and everything that exists in the world. But the only object worthy of our worship is the Almighty, as the Creator, the first cause, Almighty God, Lord of hosts. And so there are all these hosts. There's his angels, his armies of angels, but he's the Lord of hosts. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later. B'ezras Hashem.